Hi, I'm Jim Carroll. I'm the CEO of the diaTribe Foundation based here in San Francisco, California. Our mission is to improve the lives of people with diabetes, and I'm happy to join you. Thankful to Amy and everybody at DiabetesMine for their kind invitation to connect with you today. One of the most important things in the world to me is my husband Scott and our two Labrador retrievers, Blaze and Portia. But right after that is time and range, because time and range is taking over the diabetes world. As most of you know, the Diabetes Control and Complication trial, the DCCT, established that A1C of 7 was sort of the gold standard metric in diabetes. The problem with it was it just didn't provide many people with sufficient actionable information on how to manage their diabetes. It turns out that there are more than a few scenarios that can get you to an A1C of 7, and some of them can be spending your time at narrow, flat range, but it can also be spent too much time above and below range. However, in June of 1999, the FDA approved Medtronic's CGM, so we now have far greater insight into the daily variability of blood glucose than could be achieved by getting your A1C. This new technology led diaTribe to launch the Beyond A1C Movement, which asked the question, could a reduction in the variability of glucose improve the lives of people with diabetes in a way that managing your A1C couldn't? In July of 2017, the diaTribe Foundation hosted the Glycemic Outcomes Beyond A1C consensus meeting. It included the leaders from 9 diabetes organizations, 25 companies, 15 medical and academic institutions, 5 patient groups, and maybe most importantly, about a dozen FDA delegates. It was a robust discussion about the need to incorporate outcomes beyond A1C into their regulatory decisions about clinical care. This meeting and the movement of Beyond A1C launched additional efforts that included the creation of 2 additional consensus statements, one on the use of CGM and another on time and range. It also led diaTribe into a joint effort with Novo Nordisk and Abbott to increase the understanding of the value of time and range in a clinical setting by launching a website called TIRhub.com, timeandrangehub.com. Just to give you a sense of the resources that we've made available on this healthcare provider-facing website, here's a video of the Time and Range Hub of Dr. Alice Cheng from the University of Toronto. She explains why time and range is important from a clinical perspective in this video.
From a clinical perspective, I feel that time and range is a very useful glycemic metric. The hemoglobin A1C is well established already in our medical community as an important target because it has been associated with complications risk in diabetes. And it sort of gives a quick view of how someone is doing from a glycemic perspective. But I sort of see it as a high-level measurement. And what it does not do is allow me to see the granularity that then allows for a more interesting conversation and useful conversation with my patient.
I encourage all of you to take a look at TIRhub.com and share it with your networks if you find this site to be helpful. However, working with Abbott and Novo Nordisk on time and range led diaTribe to launch the Time and Range Coalition in March of 2020 at ATTD in Madrid, just right before the pandemic started. The Time and Range Coalition is a global effort. It includes nonprofits, professional societies, industry, patient advocates, researchers. You can see the list of members on the screen. It's a pretty good group. Our goal is to drive awareness and adoption of time and range, as well as time above range and below range as critical tools to improve the care of people with diabetes. So when we say time and range, we mean all 3. And we also want to ensure that time and range becomes the primary glucose metric for daily management in diabetes care globally, complemented by A1C. To achieve this objective, the Time and Range Coalition decided to focus our efforts on 3 priority areas: people with diabetes, healthcare professionals, and the regulatory and policy space. There have been questions and conversations about whether we should be adding a payers group or perhaps launching a quality measures effort, but there was sort of broad agreement that we should at least start with these 3 groups. The coalition has some sub-objectives that are focused on overcoming some of the areas of friction in this space. One is that the use of CGM is pretty much a necessity for measuring time and range, that the CGM costs and access is a huge factor in getting the technology into the hands of the people who need it to improve their time and range, that payers are reluctant to cover CGM because they haven't seen how it will make a difference to their bottom line, and that there was an important need to get the FDA and other regulatory bodies to determine that time and range was a clinically meaningful endpoint. What's exciting is that in just the short 18 months that we've been in existence, we've already seen some good results. We requested a meeting with FDA in May of 2021, and surprisingly, we've got an answer within 24 hours that resulted in a meeting 3 weeks later with both the device side and the drug side of the agency in June. It was surprising in some ways because representatives of the FDA had previously rejected the premise that time and range was a clinically relevant endpoint, and because there was just not sufficient evidence that blood glucose variability impacted the long-term health of people with diabetes. Even more surprising was how very productive the conversation was. We ended up discussing three things: drug labeling, the standardization of CGM use in clinical trials, and CGM accuracy. The label discussion centered on how time and range could be added to a drug label, and sort of centered on adding it to section 14, which is the clinical trials information section, and whether the label might include the time and range results of a drug alone, whether it be against a comparator arm, with a placebo, or a comparator arm against another drug therapy. FDA was clearly had some concerns about what that would mean for drug company marketing claims. There was also some discussion about the standardization question of how is it that we can make reasonable comparisons in clinical trial data if the CGM data is collected in different ways. In some trials, not at all. In some trials, it was collected during, sometimes after, sometimes before. Sometimes it was collected for 3 days or 7 days or 14 days. In some cases, the CGMs were blinded. In some cases, they were unblinded. So that was something we needed to address. And at the end of the meeting, Dr. Wu from CDRH had some quick questions about the accuracy of CGMs. So our follow-up in advance of our next meeting, which we expect to be around Thanksgiving, we prepared the following. We mocked up some drug labels and did it in the different ways: the time and range for the drug alone against a placebo arm against another drug therapy. We drafted a paper to address their lingering questions about CGM accuracy, and we've begun drafting a consensus statement on the standardization of the use of CGM in clinical trials, and we're planning to convene a meeting about it in Florence at ATTD, which is at the end of March next year. And hopefully that will also lead to another consensus effort around CGM usage for type 2s, which is now in discussion. We've been trying to address the larger belief by some that there's insufficient research to draw a sort of straight line to better outcomes because of time and range. That wasn't just achievable by simply maintaining an A1C of around 7. So we curated and analyzed over 130 studies related to time and range. So we have a much more complete picture of all of the information that's currently available. Since it seems very unlikely that we will ever be able to replicate a study like DCCT for all sorts of resource constraints, the coalition has reviewed the research that's available, identified where the gaps are, and now we're trying to seek additional information that can bridge those gaps. We also have completed a 4 market research studies to better understand the awareness and adoption of time and range, and some of the barriers experienced by healthcare providers and people with diabetes. So there were 2 pieces to each group, a quantitative study and a qualitative study. And we're looking forward to getting those final results actually any day now. diaTribe, which publishes a weekly newsletter called Learn, has published over 90 articles in the last 18 months and garnered over 600,000 page views about time and range. So really taking advantage of this increased awareness about time and range. There's a lot of work still to be done. Because this is a global issue, we need to expand our regulatory efforts beyond the FDA and into Europe and Asia. With EMA hiring Professor Hans de Vries recently on the device side, we anticipate that the opportunity to make some progress in Europe might happen sooner than later. We need to launch a patient and a healthcare provider-facing awareness campaign with the research results that we are looking forward to getting very soon, as well as the real-world results that we hope to collect from our Time and Range Hub.com effort, as well as Dexcom's Nick Jonas ads. We know that time and range, it's very difficult to derive from finger sticks. And so in a world that's so much more focused on access, as it should be, we're determined to increase access to CGMs. We've also mapped out various practice guidelines from the myriad professional societies, both here in the US and globally, and we're going to embark on an effort to try to achieve consensus between all these organizations, their guidelines, and the integration into clinical practices everywhere. It's very interesting work that we're doing. If your organization would want to join the coalition, please contact me. I'm Jim.Carroll@diaTribe.org. My last name has 2 R's and 2 L's in it. Our plan is to onboard a few organizations all together every year for the next couple of years. I'd be glad to put your name on the list for the steering committee to consider. In the meantime, if you're an individual or if you're someone who can't commit your organization at this time, I hope I can convince you to pledge your support in getting the word out about our efforts to get state legislators to increase access to CGM for all those people on Medicaid. It's a population that often has that great need for these tools to improve their lives, but they can't afford them. If you go to diatribechange.org, diatribechange.org, and sign the petition, the website will automatically generate letters to your state policymakers asking them to increase the access to CGM for people on Medicaid. And so it's a great thing to do. I beg you to take a look. There's also all sorts of interesting things that are going on in our space that are connected to time and range. They're not really part of the current objectives of the coalition, but they're certainly of interest to us. The possibilities of the different advances in therapies and technology, our increased understanding of this complex chronic condition. The number of conversations I've had recently about non-invasive CGMs is off the charts, especially after the White House ARPA-H proposal mentioned funding game-changing ideas, including a non-invasive smartwatch that monitors blood sugar. We know that folks at OneDrop are talking about introducing a minimally invasive CGM. Senseonics is in a human trial for 180-day implantable sensors with eyes towards 365-day sensor. There are clearly fascinating efforts to delay the onset of type 1 or put type 2 in remission, which would clearly help people stay in range. Our ability to get more drug therapies, more technology, more actionable information about staying in range into the hands of people with diabetes, not to mention the cardioprotective and the renal protective aspects of the new drug therapies, drugs that are helping with excess weight and obesity. It's all incredibly exciting, and I'm hopeful that we can make a huge difference in real people's lives. Time and Range is an incredibly amazing and exciting effort. Please do what you can to spread the word. Thank you again to Amy for letting me address you today and for your time. I hope I've inspired you to adopt time and range as a core issue in your approach to diabetes. And I look forward to answering any questions you might have while my puppies sleep. Thanks. Bye.